Now, I know what I'm about to say may sound crazy to some people, and it kind of is, but at the same time, I just feel that with their lack of playoff success this season, if they can figure out a way to set aside their personal differences, James Harden and Giannis Antetokounmpo, if I was Giannis, I would call James Harden, I would talk things out and see if he would want to come and play with him in Milwaukee. And I'm saying that because if that happens, then their strengths and weaknesses will complement each other so perfectly well, because Giannis is a ball dominant player that loves to take the ball to the basket, and James Harden is a ball dominant player that can get to the basket but also loves to shoot perimeter jump shots as well. They can create some type of version of Shaq and Kobe, but in the Eastern Conference, a modern version of Shaq and Kobe with Giannis and James Harden in the Eastern Conference. If James Harden requests a trade, or if the owner decides, you know what, this is not working, I want to break things up, or if the Rockets don't get the right coach that James Harden wants, because everybody knows he loved Mike D'Antoni. So, nothing is off the table when it comes to the Houston Rockets. And if I'm James Harden, going to the East, the easier conference, playing with a dynamic player in Giannis Antetokounmpo, and once again, your strengths are going to complement each other very, very well. And the whole Giannis doesn't have a jump shot, Giannis is not as skilled, that is true. But at the same time, when you have a dynamic player on your team like James Harden, that really doesn't matter. And for it's like James Harden be able to give the ball to somebody that can attack the rim and draw fouls and get to the rim at will, and that can pass the ball once he gets stopped. And James Harden can get easier open looks and jump shots like that instead of having to create step backs all the time. Those two players could help each other a lot. Now, I don't know if it's going to happen. I don't know what the future is going to hold, but that's just an idea that I have with Giannis Antetokounmpo, with James Harden. We know they both had some issues. They both have taken shots at each other in the media, of course. But if you want to win a championship, I think pairing those two would be something that nobody would ever think of because of their relationship. And then it would be a phenomenal thing for the NBA. And I don't consider, like I said, people love to talk about Giannis Antetokounmpo being the next Shaq. He's not the next Shaq because he doesn't play anything like Shaquille O'Neal, to me. Personally, you can't be a ball-dominant player. He's just as ball-dominant as James Harden. He's just as ball-dominant as Luka Doncic. Those are the three ball-dominant players in the NBA. Shaq wasn't bringing the ball up the floor every single play. Shaq was a traditional center. Giannis is a hybrid wing player. He's a three. He can play the 3-4 or the 5. But in the playoffs, he becomes a center because of his lack of skill set. So if we know that Giannis and his lack of skill set is not necessarily, I'm not going to say it's not going to improve, but you wouldn't be as pressed for Giannis to improve his skill set if you had a player like James Harden. And then what happens is you put James Harden with Giannis in that pick and roll. Man, James Harden's one of the greatest passers of all time. Giannis is one of the greatest finishers of all time. It could be something special. And in the playoffs, if Giannis turns into a center, it wouldn't necessarily matter because he have a elite, dynamic, superstar player in James Harden. I don't believe that Giannis can be the best player on the championship team with his skill set. But if you pair him with James Harden and let James Harden go and let James Harden be the phenomenal scorer that he is, then the sky's the limit because James Harden can be the best player on a championship caliber team. He's proven that going up against the Spurs, going up against the Golden State Warriors, going up against the Lakers, going up against all these incredible teams, but those teams were always supposed to win. If it wasn't for those teams, and we know even with Kevin Durant, the Houston Rockets with James Harden and Chris Paul was the best team that ever gave the Kevin Durant and the Golden State Warriors trouble. It wasn't LeBron James and the Cleveland Cavaliers. So we know James Harden can be the best player on a championship team. He's taken his team to multiple Western Conference Finals appearances. And he's done, people like to tell, well, he hasn't done this, he hasn't got over the hump, but who was getting over the hump of the Warriors? Who was giving over the hump of the Los Angeles Lakers? We don't know if the Los Angeles Lakers will go out and win the championship this year, but it seems like they're on that path. Who was getting in the way of the dynasty of the San Antonio Spurs? So it's just kind of like, you can't sit up and say he can't be a championship caliber player or the first option on a championship team because he's kind of proved that he can. Now, when it comes to Giannis Antetokounmpo, I don't see him being that guy because of his limited skill set. I think he needs a dynamic scorer, another superstar player to play with that can help elevate his game and also can take some of that pressure and expectations off of him. So it could be something phenomenal. If it happens, it probably won't, but this is just an idea of mine of pairing Giannis Antetokounmpo and James Harden. Once again, I talked about how both the Bucks and the Houston Rockets and how Giannis and James Harden was very similar because both the Bucks and the Rockets have kind of enabled James Harden and Giannis Antetokounmpo to play the type of games that they've wanted to play and not kind of work on other things in their games that they needed to work on. But if you can pair up their strengths together and then their weaknesses, one player's weaknesses helps the other player's weaknesses, and then you'll have a dynamic duo. But once again, nobody knows what's going to happen with Giannis. Is he going to sign the Supermax? Nobody knows what's going to happen with James Harden and the Houston Rockets. But this is just an idea of mine about Giannis and about James Harden.